paperwork, get the approval from the university. That will eventually oftentimes result in consent forms that your students and their parents have to fill out. You have to keep those on file. In my office, I've got years of consent forms. I've got a form signed by a student and a parent for every student I've taught for 10 plus years in my file cabinets. So if anybody ever came back and said, hey, I flipped open a book and there's an example of something my daughter did in that class, I never said you could do that. I can pull out and say, actually you did. Here's your signature, here's your daughter's signature. So we pay real close attention to that kind of thing.
Yeah, thinking about turnaround time, I would say on average you're looking at least a month through the process before you would get final approval, and that's going to be dependent upon the quality of your submission. So that since you're new to the process, it's possible that it would take even longer.
And sometimes you go through a process of resubmitting also, right? You turn
Absolutely.
it in, the board might say you have to clarify something and make you rewrite and turn it all back in.
Absolutely, yeah, that's the typical process is we shoot for a 2-week turnaround time, and then usually you have to make revisions at least once, which is then another 2-week turnaround time, and we have had some students go through, 3-4 rounds of resubmissions. That's obviously not what any of us want, but sometimes that's the process.
Do you guys have any questions? We're not going to have the opportunity to all be in the same room with the person that knows the process better than this. So I want to make sure if you got anything on your mind you want to ask about.
Yeah.
If you're conducting interviews with students, and it's individual interviews, would you need to do this if you're not finalizing in this specifically?
Yeah, it all comes down to if your project meets the federal definition of human subject and research. So it is possible that you could interview students individually and have your study not be designed to contribute to generalizable knowledge. Just another tidbit, a lot of people think that if you're going to publish or present your results, that means you need IRB approval. That's not true. Again, it just comes down to if your project meets those 2 federal definitions. So you can do non-generalizable action research in your classroom and, present it as a poster at a BGSU conference or, even at a different conference. So don't think you're limited because you don't get IRB approval.
Yeah, even if you go back to the beginning of the semester, last semester, the first articles that we read together, do you remember reading the 2 articles about using games in teaching math? And the one was in kind of a research journal and one was in more of a teacher type of journal. And we talked about that. Well, I don't know whether the person who wrote that article needed IRB approval or not, but I'm guessing probably not. Because that article was a little bit more of a, here's what I did with my class and here's how it turned out. And she's talking about it, just kind of sharing as a teacher in a classroom, this is what I did, here's what my students learned, here's what I do differently next time. But she wasn't trying to generalize it and say, everybody should be doing this, or we tried this in 5 different classes across 5 different schools in 3 different states, and now we've concluded that you ought to be doing. She didn't try to go for the big thing like that. She was just trying to reflect, this is something I tried in my classroom. So in that situation, she probably didn't need any approval to do that.
Yeah, that's a perfect example.
Good. Any other questions? All right, great. Well, thank you so much for coming, Dr. Snyder. Always a pleasure to have you.
Absolutely, and I just appreciate that you can see my face and know that we're here to help you if we can.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so let's take a few minutes to think through and kind of review exactly where you need to be in terms of requirements for the semester and some timing on some things. Make sure that we're all on the same page here. When you write your 3160 paper, it has a few required elements, sections on it. There is a scoring rubric at Canvas that gives you kind of some of the details things that we have talked about is starting the paper off with a title page that has an abstract. An abstract is a short, paragraph, usually italicized, that tells the reader about what they're about to read. It's a summary of what your paper is about. That will take on a very different feel when you actually do the research in the field and you do a final paper, because your abstract will actually be a description of your study. I studied this by doing this, and here's what I found out, kind of a thing. But your abstract is going to be more of a summary about what your paper is about, just to kind of get you in the mode of being able to do that. There are some examples of those at Canvas from past classes. But the first page should have some kind of an abstract or summary about what the reader is about to read. Then we've talked about that kind of the introduction section where you talk about what is the problem. What are you interested in studying? How did you become interested in that in the first place? And really define for the reader what your topic is that you're interested in doing some research on. Once you have kind of laid the problem out and said this is what I want to talk about, we have discussed how the next step is to do what? That's right, very good, a literature review. What has everybody else done? I've said it several times, you're not the first person who have ever studied this before, so you want to know what has everybody else done. So after you finish that introduction, you're going to go into the literature review, and that's going to go on for oftentimes a few pages, kind of saying, a study was done where this was discovered and another study did this, and kind of laying out what other people already know from the research that they've done and how that's leading you to an eventual kind of research question that you want to ask. And you sort of generally conclude that section by saying, therefore, here's what I would like to study in my research. Once you have laid out what the questions are, what other people have done, and what you're interested in researching yourself, then you're going to get into sort of a methodology section. And this is where we sort of bridge the 4160 process, because in 4160 you really flesh this out in terms of exactly what you're going to do in your school to collect data and analyze it. Right now all we're interested in is a draft of how you might conduct a study. So it's kind of like the area that I'm interested in is using children's literature and teaching science, and here's what everybody else has done to this point, what we know. And if I do research on this in my classroom, what I would be interested in doing is this. I'm going to teach this kind of a unit, I'm going to do interviews, I'm going to give a survey, whatever it happens to be, describe in a kind of a general way what you would do for your methodology. You don't have to be too detailed here. We're talking about a page or so that describes what the methodology might look like. One of the things that we've talked about throughout the year also is that you may or may not do exactly the same thing when you get in the field. And that's why we don't want you to go too far, even with the methodology piece, to lay out exactly what your methodology might be, because you could spend a lot of time detailing that, figuring out exactly how you want to do this study, and then get into school and discover that that study is actually not even possible in your school. And I gave you the example of a person last year, true story. Remember that one with the technology? Okay, she was going to study technology, one-on-one technology with her students, got into a school that had almost no technology, and she really couldn't begin to do the study that she wanted to do, and had to back up and do something different, which ended up working. It was great research that she did anyway, but luckily she didn't have so many eggs in the basket because she was able to take up kind of a right turn and do something a little bit different with her school. I didn't put on this bulleted list, but the assumption also is that your paper will end with a bibliography of any of the sources that you've cited throughout your introduction, literature review, or methodology. And that is also on your on the rubric that we have up for you at Canvas. So this is really the paper. I don't want to, and I mentioned this also in the fall, I don't want you to look at it as just really very difficult, burdeny, hard paper. Nothing different from what you've done in other classes before. In terms of digging up, finding studies that have been done and putting that together, but we want to teach you kind of the process of what that looks like, because if you think about this phasing into next year, once you've kind of defined a problem and you've done a literature review and methodology, you can expand on this methodology piece, go out in the field and actually collect the data, analyze it, write about the data, draw conclusions, and finish the paper. And so really, in a sense, what we're doing is taking a big research paper and chopping it up into two different pieces. Many of you will do the research for this project in the fall during methods. In the past, most people did it in the spring. 2 years ago, we started allowing people to do it in the fall, and it has really become more of the norm. Because once you get into student teaching, you've got so much going on with your lesson planning, the EDTL, and all that stuff that you're doing that it's sort of hard to find the time to be able to collect all the data the way you want it to. So I'm going to recommend that you collect the data in the fall if it's possible in your methods classes. You're in the field for several weeks, so you got some time to do that, right? We just came out of a meeting talking about field time and what that looks like. So we've already got your fall semester all scheduled out and ready for you. It's good to go after today. So, all right. So, any questions about your paper? Yeah, isn't that amazing? I mean, this is what we did at a faculty meeting today. We spent a couple hours mapping out your fall semester, what you're going to be, where you're going to be, when, and so forth. So, we're just a few weeks ahead of schedule.
You probably said this last semester, but how many references are you supposed to have for the literature review?
Well, what I said last semester was at least say 6 to 8, but there's no hard and fast rule for that. Some people will have 15 or 20. Some might rely on a little bit less. It really depends a lot on how big and significant those studies are. In some cases, you might pull this one little piece out and require lots of different sources to be able to make a point. In others, it might be a bigger study that it takes less. So if you take a look at the sample ones that are on Canvas, you get a little bit of a sense of what other people have done. But I would say at least 6 or 8 prime good sources. I don't know, Dr. Manny, any experience with that one in terms of what you're looking for? That's going to vary by advisor too, so.
Yeah, strictly less than 50.
Strictly less than 50, very good, I like it.
Yeah, really. Yeah. But I think you're right, 6 to 8, I can be pleased with that if they're good studies.
And you need to work with your advisor on that, because you'll notice that there are several things when it comes to both 3160 and 4160 that kind of go unspoken or unwritten. And part of that is because you're working individually with an advisor that's going to have his or her own expectations too. You know, so if I were to say you must have 10, your advisor might say, actually, I want you to have 20, or I want you to have 8, or whatever. That's something that you work on together with them until it feels right. And so I'm not going to sort of mandate that. I'll leave that up to the states to make their own decision. Okay. All right. Any other questions about this? Yes, ma'am.
In general, how long do you expect the paper to be?
Again, take a look at your samples. Typically, this paper will run about 10 pages. 8 to 10 is typical. Because if you think about it, kind of doing this, if you got a title page with an abstract, if your introduction runs 2 or 3 pages, and your lit review runs another 4 or 5 pages, and a page for methodology and a bibliography, you're going to get to the 8 to 10 page range pretty quickly. Anything else? Okay. Reminder then that in addition to the paper that you write and submit to your advisor will also be asked to complete a checklist. And just to remind you of that, there are various things on there, but your advisor will be given, it's at Canvas, they can download and print out and fill out and give to us. It asks about your ability to set and meet deadlines, so make sure that you do that you're in communication with your advisor regularly and setting some deadlines that, I'm going to have a first draft done by February 1st, or we're going to get together on March 14th, or whatever it happens to be, that you're setting some deadlines and keeping those, and so they're asked about your ability to do that. They also ask about just kind of the written paper in general. Did you keep up with deadlines, give drafts in a reasonable amount of time? And I would say that reasonable amount of time is really important, okay? So be careful not to give a faculty member a draft of your paper on a Thursday and say, can I have your feedback by noon tomorrow because I want to finish this over the weekend. Not a good idea, okay? We're all busy people. They're as busy as you are. And so bottom line is, if I get that draft and you say, hey, can you take a look at this draft and get together with me sometime in the next couple of weeks, that's a lot more reasonable than can you do this by tomorrow. Okay? Because the odds are, if you say, can you do it by tomorrow, they're going to say, no, I can't do that. And not because they're being mean, but because they don't have time. Okay? So make sure that you sort of working along, give deadline, set some deadlines and keep them. And most importantly, make sure that you're communicating and professional with your advisors. So this communication is just a really big piece. It comes up almost every year, sadly, and not in a huge deal, but I get this. I'll be sitting in my office during office hours and the phone rings and it's Dr. So-and-so that says, hey, what's Allison doing? I really haven't heard from her in like 3 months and the paper's due in 4 weeks and she hasn't even called me. Do you know is she still on campus? And I don't know, it puts me in a really awkward position. I'm thinking, well, why haven't you been talking to your advisor? So Allison, don't do that.